Okay, so we'll continue on debating and discussing the neoliberal turn and after or that coincided with the democratic transition or the third wave of democratization in Latin America. So basically, we stopped at how political leaders managed to implement harsh and drastic economic reform measures and followed through on the international financial institutions' prescriptions in order to recover their economies. So we have three main explanations. The first one, this kind of close relationship or link between neoliberalism and neopopulism in Latin America. So it sounds odd in the beginning, but we showed how there is kind of close affinity between both of them. And there are two other explanations, the psychological one and how we can look into this micro-foundational or cognitive basis of decision-making in order to examine or to investigate how political leaders manage to implement unpopular economic policies and how citizens actually accepted and received these policies and why actually they didn't revolt or they didn't show any kind of resistance in some countries to these unpopular and austerity measures. And there is a third explanation regarding shifting coalitional or distributional coalitions. So we need to investigate in some detail these kind of politics of economic reform measures by looking into this shift in distributional politics and forming social and economic new social and economic coalitions. So these are the explanations of how the enactment or the policies of neoliberalism were implemented in the region. And then we will focus on briefly this lecture on the main repercussions or the implications for democratic governance in terms of responsiveness, accountability, and participation. And then over the next 3 weeks, we're going to cover in some detail the quality, the stability of democratic regime doesn't entail by any means any sort of high quality of democratic governance. So let's start with the second explanation of in the existing literature that covers, this implementation of neoliberal and radical economic measures. So according to Weiland, he actually applied cognitive psychological decision theories in order to investigate, this kind of unpopular and radical economic measures. So unlike you have the rational truth theory would argue that leaders would choose, will make decisions and citizens will accept, these kind of, or will make choices that would maximize their utility in absolute sense or absolute terms. But here, according to this kind of cognitive basis of decision making or choice making, here you have to look at these kind of domains of gains and losses in terms of relatively. You have to choose between relative gains and relative losses. So according to prospect theory, it's a psychological theory. So there are two main domains: domain of losses and domain of gains. If you are, as a political leader or as a citizen, if you find yourself in this domain of losses, so you are much more likely to choose risky decisions, that these decisions actually carry some promises for gain in future, but these decisions actually entail as well some sort of big losses. But you can follow these risky decisions because you are in the domain of losses and you have nothing to lose but to take these risky choices. But once you enter or you find yourself in this domain of gains, so you refrain from taking any kind of risk, and you will be much more cautious and prudent in your choices or in your decisions. So these domains are essential in order to examine or to explain how political leaders, after the democratic transition, or after this when economic crisis and debt crisis and hyperinflation hit hard, they actually took harsh austerity measures to stabilize the economy and to liberalize their economies. But again, these kind of psychological explanations, or these micro-foundational elements of decision making, they don't work. They work in some sort of political, economic, and ideational context. So they are not separated from the wider or the broader context. So what was the ideational one? The ideational factor that these kind of state interventionist policies and import substitution industrialization no longer carry any kind of future promises of gain. So they applied these policies, and the state already maximized its economic role and its size, but it actually eventually led to this severe economic crisis. So this discredited, this old economic or state-led development model. So that's why there is kind of a space in order to implement new economic model or new economic policies to give it a full chance at the moment. But as well, economically, as I mentioned, the exhaustion of import substitution industrialization with varying degrees led to severe economic crisis across the continent. So some countries actually some countries achieved net economic growth, like Brazil and Venezuela, and they differed with regard to this level of the level of or the rates of inflation. So in some countries, they actually went into 3 or 4 digits, the inflation rate, like in Argentina and Peru, and to some extent Brazil, but it achieved some sort of some level of economic growth. Venezuela, they suffered, citizens suffered some sort of fiscal crisis, but they have the inflation rate remained at manageable level in a way or another. And the institutional context as well, he actually applied this theory to 4 main countries: Argentina, Peru, Brazil, and Venezuela. So and the research design, they are the most similar system design. So we need to examine these cognitive, psychological, or the application of the prospect theory in these 4 contexts. But these psychological explanations, they are not a standalone. It's not a standalone factor or theory, but it actually works within some sort of economic structures and institutional factors as well that would affect the shift from these 2 domains, from the domain of losses to the domain of gains and vice versa. So institutionally, these countries also they have kind of variation with regard to the political and organizational support of political leadership and the party system, the main characteristics of their party systems. So Argentina and Venezuela, they have well-established party system. Like Argentina, they have Peronist and radicals. They actually dominated the political scene for in the late 80s and early 90s. By then, they had dominated the political landscape, and they had wide support base. In Peru and Brazil, they had much more chaotic party system and volatile party system. So that's why they didn't have this kind of well-established or well-entrenched party system there. And this affected, the organization and the organizational basis and the support, the political support base that would guarantee some sort of continuity to political leaders in their implementation of radical and drastic economic reform measures. So subsequently, when it comes to political support, Brazil, they lack this kind of organizational and political support. And Peru, to some extent, they didn't have this well-established party system that would offer organizational and support base for political leaders to, or institutional capacity for political leaders to penetrate some bureaucratic enclaves or the state apparatuses. Unlike Argentina and Venezuela, they had this sort of political support, but actually the choices of political leaders were essential in order to maintain or to erode this kind of political support. So these countries, they have, they share, or they have some commonalities with regard to their colonial legacy, with regard to like economic dependency and degree of integration into global market. But they actually differed with regard to the outcome and the main independent variable, the severity of economic crisis, and how political leaders and like citizens found themselves, you know, in different domains, losses and gains. So we have here two sides in order to look at. So the first one, from this, you know, from the point of view of citizens, where they found themselves back then, and the presidents or political leaders, the new political leaders, where they found themselves in domain of losses or domain of gains. So what determined these kind of these domains, the severity of, or the degree of economic crisis. So what the citizens actually, they were interested most in like overcoming in this hyperinflation, because it affected, you know, these kind of the rate of the inflation rate affected their daily lives and their economic well-being. So the reference point is the status quo, the degree or the severity of the crisis, and then as like if like the inflation rate went out of control, so citizens would find themselves in the domain of losses. So they might follow risky choices, most likely to follow risky choices in order to revert or to restore the pre-crisis status or the pre-crisis economic well-being. And as a president as well, what interest, what's most interested choices, what's the most or the urgent choices, or the urgent issues that they needed, you know, to tackle or to address rapidly, was the fiscal crisis, the fiscal health of the state. If they didn't have enough resources, or they didn't have like the fiscal capacity to govern, or to guarantee, or to the flow of resources, so this would threaten their very existence in power. So as a president, you may find yourself in the domain of losses if there is severe fiscal crisis, domain of gains if there is kind of sound fiscal policies or fiscal status. But as I mentioned, these kind of organizational and socioeconomic factors as well were very important in order to determine, you know, which or actually to shift between, you know, these domains, as we are going to see in the case of Brazil. So with the domain of losses, presidents or new leaders, they actually took risky choices, and they gained some sort of popular support of these policy choices. So Carlos, like Menem in Argentina, Fujimori in Peru, and Collor in Brazil. So the context was like severe hyperinflation crisis, with the rate reached or went into 3 or 4 digits. And as a citizen now, so the risky choice is to give a chance to newcomers, you know, to politics, that people that they are totally, you know, outsider, or they came from outside of the political establishment. The rational choice here as a citizen, you might have voted for like tested politicians in order to recover the economy or to address the economic crisis and the social question. But here, citizens actually, they took risky choices by voting for Fujimori as an outsider. He was totally, as I mentioned last lecture, from totally unknown. He didn't relate or belong to any existing political parties. And Koyer as well, people, instead of voting for example, like center left or like from like Social Democratic Party that would have this kind of leftist inclination or some sort of promises in order to address the social and economic crisis, but they actually voted for Koyer, and he was kind of unknown to the unknown politician, you know, to comparing to the existing ones back then. And even LaAm, he came from the Peronist. It's like well-established political party in Argentina, but he came from unknown province. So like he was not tested at the national level, but still people voted for these leaders. They campaigned on, like especially LaAm and Fujimori, they campaigned on this populist platform, but they made, you know, these kind of vague promises how to with regard to the addressing or tackling the economic crisis. But Koyer actually promised in his campaign neoliberal policies. So it might like these were like risky choices just to give a chance to unknown political leaders or untested political leaders in order to run the country and to carry out or to implement these economic reform measures. So when it comes to the organizational basis as well, like Koyer and Fujimori, most especially, they lacked any kind of partisan support or wide support base, because they came from like from the outside of the existing or well-established political parties. And LaAm, despite the fact that he came from the Peronist party, well-established party, but he lacked this kind of party support, especially he faced some sort of severe opposition from party leaders because of his policies. So, but again, you know, as a citizen, you actually took these or supported risky policies and offered some support for untested politicians because you found yourself, you know, in this domain of loss. So in these kind of with these losses, so you follow these risky choices and you gave a chance to unknown political leaders in order to implement these drastic to give full chance to these drastic and radical measures with the like because as like it may like recover the economy in a way or another. And as like new presidents or like new political leaders, you need to stay in office, but still you found yourself, you know, in this domain of losses. So you took these risky choices, despite the fact that it may have threatened your very existence in power or in your position. So the three leaders, they actually took these severe, these drastic and radical policies in order to overcome, in order to recover their economies. But the fact that they gained popular support, but Koyer actually, like Fujimori and LaAm, we mentioned last lecture that Fujimori actually tried to implement like mixed strategy between like micro level populism by offering some social emergency programs and like appealing to subaltern or lower classes in order to support his policies. And he actually personalized the authority, but he gained some sort of support from atomized popular classes. LaAm as well, he actually co-opted or managed to reach out to some bureaucrats and some military figures in order to get some institutional or organizational support. And he reached out to some conservative elements or conservative parties and economic conglomerates as well in order to sustain his policies. Coyer as well followed. He tried to personalize the authority, and he sought some degree of personal autonomy, but he actually provoked some existing interest. He didn't actually he didn't actually reach it out. He didn't reach out to business communities or business associations in order to gain some support. And he ruled by decrees. He didn't even consult with other parties, or didn't cultivate any kind of collaborative relationship with the legislature. So that's why his policies, his like excessive reliance on decrees, or his personal authority, provoked wide masses and provoked the existing elites and business association as well. So that's why it led to like popular resistance, and eventually led to his impeachment. So the same policies like that, the same risky choices and the same risky policies that gained initial popular acceptance, if we plugged in these organizational factors, you may find that this actually permitted some sort of persistence of these policies in Peru and Argentina, and even like people voted for them for another term. But in Brazil, these organizational factors were essential in undermining the social and the organizational basis of Coyer, that eventually led to his impeachment and removal from power. So the same the same risky choices gained popular or received popular resistance in Venezuela. So by looking at different domains between or by looking into this from different perspectives, from the citizen point of view or from a politician's point of view, they are a little bit different. Because Perez here found himself in the domain of losses. He needed to improve the fiscal capacity of the state, and citizens they found themselves in the domain of gains, because they believed that there was some sort of potential by using oil resources in order to improve the economic status. And the inflation rate didn't reach this kind of, didn't spiral out of control. So that's why they didn't find themselves in the domain of losses in order to tolerate, or in order to give a full chance or full support for a new political leader or new austerity policies. So Perez here as a president came from the Democratic Action, well-established political party. He actually needed to increase, the economic resources, or to improve the fiscal capacity of the state, and to follow through these austerity measures and deregulation in order to liberalize the economy. But in order to recover or to overcome this fiscal crisis, and to proceed with these austerity measures and economic liberalization measures, he had to gain the support from his own party and from wide masses as well. So what happened? He lacked the political support, this kind of political base of support from his own party. The party, the Action Democratic Party, refused to give him authority in order to take, some sort of discretionary measures in order to handle the crisis. They refused to give him this authority. And actually in the parliament, they sided with the opposition and blocked, some of the government initiative and some of the government policies that precluded, his policy agenda, or they precluded, his ability to proceed with this economic and liberalization policies. So domain of losses, but lacking support base or organizational basis, and then citizens that they didn't find themselves, in the domain of losses, but they actually they perceived that relatively they had some gains. So that's why they were not obliged, to give, to follow or to support these risky choices. But Perez actually was stubborn, and he proceeded with these policies despite, the mounting resistance and these tremendous, political opposition from his own party and from the opposition party as well. With this tolerant level of inflation rate and the perception of relative gains from the citizens' point of view, they actually revolted against, or they took to the streets in order to vocalize their opposition to Perez policies, and what was known like Caracazo revolt in 1989. And actually these policies received severe or fierce popular resistance that actually put an end to or precluded the implementation of these economic policies. Finally, in Chile, it was exceptional because Pinochet actually he was the one who implemented these severe economic measures in Chile before the transition to democracy, or before the return of democracy. So despite that, Chile faced severe economic crisis in the mid 80s. After democratic transition in 1990, the Concertación, the center of left coalition found them the politicians found themselves, in the domain of gains, with significant level of economic growth. They didn't face this skyrocketing inflation, and citizens as well. They didn't face, these severe hyperinflation crisis. And as a politician, they have fiscal. The state enjoyed considerable fiscal capacity to proceed with their social and economic programs. So that's why the first elected president after the transition, Elon, from the Concertación, or the Social Democratic Party, he actually decided, despite the fact that they had some other options, but he decided to continue, or to continue with the same economic policies, with some sort of promises, for poverty alleviation programs, and some sort of social and economic social spending, or socioeconomic partial socioeconomic reforms. So unexpectedly, these kind of domain of losses and gains and prospect theory would also help account for the continuity of unpopular policies, despite the fact that political leaders would have made different choices. And these policies gained as well popular support. Citizens found themselves, in the domain of gains. Economically, they didn't face severe economic crisis, and as well the traumatic experience under Pinochet's role. So they needed to stabilize, or to give the new democratic regime full chance in order to govern without any sort of resistance or disruptive actions. Shamus as well offered third explanation or third examination of the implementation of these unpopular or drastic economic measures or neoliberal measures by focusing the analysis on coalitions and distributional politics. So he didn't deny that elite choices and institutional and organizational capacity of the states are essential in implementing these policies, but these choices and these institutional capacities are rooted in power relations. So there is a need to focus the analysis on power dynamics and the shifting of the socioeconomic foundation of political regimes. So political economy, or theories or some institutionalists would argue that in order to steer the country away from this state developmental model or state-led growth model to market-oriented policies or reform measures, so the state had to enjoy some degree of autonomy, and like the state bureaucratic apparatus has to be insulated from any kind of economic or social pressures. So they're like as kind of necessary conditions. State autonomy and cohesive technocrats are essential elements in order to proceed with neoliberal or market-oriented measures. So from this account, in order to have this cohesion and this degree of autonomy, what's the problem is any kind of shift or change in economic policies or development strategies. You have like losers from like previously implemented policies, and winners or potential winners from the new policies. And the problem here is losers, like those who benefited from previous or past policies or development strategies. They had like well-organized interest groups that actually they had the ability organizationally to block the passage of any law or any new economic policies. And beneficiaries of the new or potential ones, potential winners, they are way too unorganized, and that they had to wrestle with or they had to solve this collective action problem. They didn't have any kind of organization in order to work cohesively and coherently as a group in order to meet the best outcome, or to achieve the like to push for these reform measures that would carry some benefits for them all. So you have like organized interest that would block the new policies, like from the previous socioeconomic coalitions, and winners that actually they are fragmented organizations, and they had to solve their collective action problem in order to push through these reform measures. So by focusing the analysis on how like the politics of reform here is how to neutralize losers and how to empower winners, how to shift your like coalitional politics from the losers in order to neutralize them, that the by definition they are well-organized interest groups, and how to empower them, how to empower winners organizationally in order to shift your like the socioeconomic to have like a new socioeconomic foundation for your regime as a politician in order to push through these reform measures. So here, like from this point of view, there is a need, as Shams mentioned, to have like this socioeconomic logic of politics by embedding these elite choices and institutional capacity into existing power relations. So if you, as a politician, you need to shift your like coalitional politics or your orientation from previous from the current losers that they benefited from your past policies, state-led development or import substitution industrialization. So you need to offer some rents or some incentives for potential winners in order to mitigate any kind of uncertainty by offering them some sort of rents, like in regulations, some sort of regulations that would guarantee like concentration of ownership in order to push through privatization policies. So instead of being vulnerable to market competition, so now as a state or as a politician, you guaranteed in a way or another their monopoly over particular sectors. So by offering these kind of rents and distributional politics, by distributing some sort of rents and by guaranteeing some sort of benefits to these winners, so you shifted, the coalition from um, like the losers to the potential winners, or the new business firms or the new business associations. So there is no room here for state autonomy, because there is kind of a deal between state and new business associations or business firms or economic conglomerates in order to create this framework of collusion, of power, in order to establish close connections with business groups to push for these harsh economic measures that actually disproportionately benefited different business sectors, and it had like high social cost. Like if we have like some examples, so if we focus on what happened in Chile as well under Pinochet before the return of democracy, the breakdown of democratic regime of Allende. So you found like economic conglomerates that they had or they concentrated on the export sector, especially in mining and agriculture and manufacturing sectors, especially like papers and liquid asset sectors. They actually supported the military, or they called the actually like they disagreed with Allende's economic, social, and economic policies, and they supported, the call for the military intervention in order to put an end to any potential of economic and social distributive politics that were promised by a leftist coalition. So these sectors, they had some sort of international competitive edge. They had like this connection with international firms, and there were kind of convenient marriage between Pinochet's regime and these business or economic conglomerates. So those who actually served in the executive offices of economic firms, they did hold some positions in the cabinet and the central bank as well. So those like that, they had some sort of benefits and vested interest as stakeholders in pushing through these social and economic transformation. So now they were in charge of decision making. So that's why this enabled, the regime to implement these structural adjustment measures without facing any sort of popular resistance from losers. But it was actually like a harsh and repressive military regime. But anyway, the point here is how like shifting coalitional politics enabled political leaders, or enabled the political regime in order to push for or to proceed with this harsh economic measure. In Mexico as well, so they had this long tradition of efficient, financial bureaucrats, or like efficient, financial bureaucracy. So it actually like some technocratic elements, they were in charge of making these economic and financial decisions. So as well, like they had some positions in the central bank and the Ministry of Budget and Planning. So they were motivated by mainly by economic benefits or market imperatives rather than political ones. So this enabled politicians to undertake, financial and trade liberalization. So what happened under Portillo, this kind of nationalization of the financial or the private banks, this led to a new U-turn. by enabling or appealing to the private firms or the private sector in order to purchase more than 33% of the nationalized banks. So this led to some sort of this would give, like, it actually gave some access to private sector, to private credit, and enabled them to have some sort of control over financial sector. And as well, like big commercial sectors or with some multi-sectoral characteristics, they pushed for trade liberalization by like removing, tariffs. And these like firms or economic firms, which are like multi-sectoral by nature, and they had like big size, so they afforded, the cost, and they made it, they extracted some benefits from trade liberalization. So unlike like domestic oriented sector, or like these kind of narrow scale economies, they didn't afford these trade liberalization or unprotective measures, because they didn't have the ability to cope with the international competition. So removing, these tariffs undermined, their competitive advantage, and actually diminished, their domestic market. But it benefited some big size firms and multi-sectoral firms that actually had some sort of state subsidies in order to encourage support, and they pushed for privatization as well in order to extract more benefits from liberalizing trade, and pushing for privatization as well in order to accumulate their benefits. In Argentina, like as well, like in addition to LaAm as a politician and his choices, by like approaching or delinking or actually broke the link between the Peronist party and trade unions, and co-opting some sort of top personnel inside the Peronist party in order to mitigate any potential any possibility of popular resistance coming from mainly organized trade unions. So in addition to that, he actually shifted the socioeconomic foundation of his regime by approaching, some conservative elements by like reaching out to OSID party, known for its support for liberalization, economic liberalization, and market-oriented policies, and some economic conglomerates and business firms as well, in order to support his policies. In order to push for privatization policies, for example, he offered some rents to potential winners, as I mentioned, in order to mitigate, these uncertainties of market competition. He offered some preferential regulations or preferential policies that guaranteed, in a way or another, this concentration of ownership, especially in specific sectors like telecommunication, for example, and it guaranteed some sort of monopoly of particular firms over these sectors. And this was like both sides achieved mutual benefits. So the state actually replenished its cover and improved its fiscal capacity by getting, some sort of by selling off, these public enterprises and getting some sort of material or economic resources that actually improved, its financial status. And as private firms as well, they mitigated, any kind of uncertainty regarding their future gains by concentrating their ownership and monopolizing the market in a way or another. So this is like one explanation, but it actually, as I mentioned, it here like varied from one sector to another. Like neoliberal policies had like the policies actually had different aspects and different dimensions. So trade liberalization, capital liberalization, financial liberalization, privatization. So you had to focus on different coalitions depending on what actual liberalization policies we are talking about. So here, like, for privatization in Argentina, you may but it might be different with regard to trade liberalization. So in Mexico, for example, like financial sector liberalization and trade liberalization might be different from labor market, liberalization. And in Chile as well, it's a little bit like unique case, because it was one of the early reformer in the region, and actually this kind of potential of popular resistance, and with the crackdown on the leftist forces, and this traumatic experience of harsh repressive regime mitigated any kind of possibility of mounting social resistance or mounting social opposition. To be sure, like, it happened in the mid 80s, but Pinochet managed to quell or to put down um, these initial resistance to economic policies or to the economic outcome or the economic crisis back then. But it actually, how it happened in these like export and manufacturing sectors, it was by like focusing on these sectors in order to see how like shifting coalitions enabled political leaders in order to undertake or to move ahead with these policies. Is important as well. So you have like different trend or different stream in the literature that would disagree on this by saying, what, there was kind of exaggeration when it comes to losers' organizational capacity. Like Ben Ross Schneider, for example, he mentioned that these people, or the losers, actually proved to be kind of paper tigers. They didn't actually like impose any sort of challenge or threat on the neoliberal regimes. And actually there was kind of exaggeration about their organizational capacity or their mobilization capacity in order to block these policies. And more importantly, some of the policies were like implemented by presidential decrees, by giving some degree of authority to presidents or the executive in order to implement these policies, especially in at their early stages. But later, the legislature actually intervened, and the role of opposition became much more salient with blocking or passing some sort of economic policies. So we covered now this transition to democratic governance and eliminating, any potential of reverting or going back to the old pattern of social and deep social polarization and the military intervention in order to arbitrate, these the elite disputes, and to restore stability and order, and to put an end to this popular mobilization. And then, like, this actually, it was like unfavorable context or economic context in order to establish democratic governance, especially with this severe economic crisis that swept actually across the different countries in the region. But democracy survived, and political leaders, for different reasons, implemented these drastic and radical reform measures. And surprisingly, the first stage went without any sort of resistance, and it was kind of technocratic consensus in these countries, regardless of the reason, because of these psychological explanations, the distinction between different domains, losses and gains, or because of these populist appeal that some leaders managed to use populist discourse and some selected targeting in order to acquire some sort of popular basis to proceed with these harsh measures, or shifting, by shifting the balance of power between different economic forces or different economic coalitions, and distributing some rents in order to proceed or to implement these policies. For different reasons, democracy survived, and political leaders managed to implement these harsh economic measures and made this radical shift from state-led growth model to neoliberal or market-oriented measures following through on the prescription of international financial institutions. But again, it had like these policies have had some implications for like the quality of democratic governance and this like the stability of democratic regimes. As I mentioned, doesn't mean like the achieved high degree of quality with regard to representation and participation and responsiveness to people's need or to social demands. So what's the point here? It's like shifting or adopting different sort of development policies or strategies. It actually it had repercussions, for the balance of power between different social forces. It's more or less related to this losers winners dichotomy or distinction. So here, under import substitution industrialization, so the popular classes and corporatist arrangements, the ones talked about in the first week and the second week, they gained some sort of or played like important role in pushing for or in supporting these far-reaching distributive politics and pushing for import substitution industrialization and mitigating the conservative elements and any sort of counter-mobilization before the installation of bureaucratic authoritarian regimes. So what happened after the implementation of these policies? It was the social and the economic and political landscape like changed radically by tilting the balance of power between the old forces and the new forces. Now, like business elites gained some sort of political clout, and they had like much more authority and latitude in economic decision making, and actually the whole some sort of political position in order to implement policies that would guarantee their economic benefits or economic interest. So this balance of power, the shift in the balance of power affected the quality of democratic governance. So first of all, when it comes to responsiveness, the integration into global market and the implementation of this liberalization or neoliberal measures. So the state now, or there are kind of restrictions and constraints in on the state spending or on its fiscal capacity. So now the state had to diminish, its size, had to scale back or to roll back on some social spending. The state now has no latitude or great authority. It didn't play. It's not like the main or the most important or the most important actor in decision making policies. Now it has to take into consideration the interest of a business association or private firms, and that they had like some connections with a global market, or they had some international competitive edge. So now the state doesn't have like wide options to choose from and to implement some sort of economic, social and social programs to respond or to actually to meet people's demands, especially like the popular classes that actually benefited from the old distributive politics. And this affected, the degree of participation as well. In order to implement these policies, so political parties that they had traditional links to trade unions and popular classes, they had actually to break with these traditional links in order to dismantle the corporatist arrangements and to fragment, the previously organized interests that would pose or that would represent like a challenge or a threat to their very existence and power. So they had actually to actually to abolish, you know, these corporatist arrangements in order to. So now, like, by these intermediary organizations, now they didn't have like trade unions, for example, they didn't have like political leadership to speak for or to represent like rank and file, or to represent laborers in decision-making circles in order to push for some of the social policies or some of their social demands, like pay increase or insurance or like collective bargaining. So now, like, it's open to supply and demand and to market forces, and this affected like some of them, they were fired from, for example, like privatized enterprises, and now they were forced into, or they made their own way to informal sector. That this is by definition way too disorganized, and they didn't have this kind of all-encompassing corporatist organization that would defend their interest in decision-making circle. So they were like previously mobilized sector or popular sector, they became largely demobilized. They lacked, you know, this kind of organizational and mobilizational capacity in order to participate in decision-making, to have a say in this process, in order to push for their demands and to pressure or to press, you know, the national governments in order to respond to their or to meet their demands. And subsequently, this affected, you know, this accountability. So people, they don't have the organizational capacity or their like institutional channel in order to hold politicians accountable for their policy choices or for the economic outcomes or for whatever outcome. So this kind of no variation, you know, when it comes to policy programs. So this restricted political competitiveness. Citizens actually didn't have more choices or more political platforms to choose between them. So this kind of restrictions, or as we're going to see, like dilution, political parties actually diluted their brands, and they made like this ideological shift from like the left and central left to the right. So this actually eliminated any kind of distinction between political platforms. So people like the organizational capacity and the institutional channels in order to hold politicians accountable, and they didn't have like so many political choices in order to have like representative in decision making, and this affected the quality of representation as well. So with this limited range of feasible policy options, so they didn't have like a politician now campaigning on leftist or import substitution industrialization program, for example, or far-reaching redistributive program. With some political parties actually broke their linkage to laborers and their social constituents, and they focused mainly on some selective incentives or clientelistic networks in some provinces, that some threatening provinces. So they didn't have like they cannot hold politicians accountable, and they don't have like representative or political forces that would claim, you know, the representation in decision-making bodies. And political parties as well, they made, you know, they veered, you know, to the right, the ideological right, in order to implement these policies. So this diluted, you know, these ideological distinction between different political parties. And but what happened, like when people, they didn't have like political party or a political alternative to turn to, so they resorted to a political outsider when it was when the option was available, in order to choose to represent them or to campaign actually on anti-establishment or anti-elitist platform, as it happened with Fujimori and Venezuela, as we are going to see next time. So this actually affected the quality of democratic governance in by looking into different aspects or different, dimensions of democratic governance, like the responsiveness of the democratic regime or the political regime to people's needs, what would account for meaningful participation, like casting a ballot or having like real say or real participation in decision-making circle, having like an representative that would push for your interest, and then the ability of citizens or people to hold politicians accountable in even like subsequent elections or through the same like electoral contestations. So this gave like a boost to political outsiders in order to reach power and to put an end to the, in some countries actually, to put an end to this well-established party system, as it happened in Venezuela, and to in Peru as well, and in Bolivia, as we are going to see. So over the next 3 weeks, we're going to focus mainly on the quality of democracy issue by covering, many aspects or dimensions of this eroding or erosion of the quality of democracy. So we will focus on the party system and different different outcomes or different implications or repercussions of economic liberalization measures for the stability or the main features of political system that the party system totally collapsed in Venezuela and in Bolivia, and gave way to political outsider. And Chile managed in a way to like the party system in Chile and Uruguay proved some degree of resilience, and then like how some established political parties like in Uruguay, for example, managed to de-align voters from traditional political parties and realign them to new leftist options. So you have like different or diverse trajectories on the impact of economic liberalization measures. It had different implications or different outcomes with regard to party system and with regard to like political participation as well. So we're going to see how we define political participation, like for when we focus mainly on, or we limit the analysis to this electoral contestation policies and the collapse or the decay of the corporatist organizations and the atomization of the civil society organizations, this may hold true, but it gave like neoliberal policies actually politicized other sectors like ethnic communities and gave rise to political leaders that politicized ethnicity and politicized ethnic mobilizations in order to reach power and to improve on political participation. So we will focus on like party system, social movement, and political participation, and whether or not neoliberal policies actually and to what extent neoliberal policies affected political dynamics with the emergence of outsiders, and whether or not these political outsiders actually like handled these issues of representation and participation and accountability better than, or the offered alternative to liberal representation model. So over the next 3 weeks, we are going to cover these issues in some detail. Yeah, that's all for today, and see you next week. Bye.